The galaxy had long since written off Galactic 9. High Marshal Zyrex of the Dominion Survey Fleet had filed the abandonment report himself, 3 cycles ago, from the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by the finest cartographers and xenobiologists the Dominion could produce. Every sensor array had agreed. Every calculation confirmed it. The Beachworld, that sprawling oceanic jewel of crashing violet tides and bone-white sand stretching across 90% of the planet's surface, had gone dark. No signals. No biological mass readings above microbial. No radio noise. No electromagnetic chatter of any kind. Galactic 9, abandoned. Resources, negligible. Threat level, 0, Zyrex had written. He had signed it with a steady hand and transmitted it to Dominion Central without a second thought. That was 3 cycles ago. Now, High Marshal Zyrex stood in his war chamber aboard the Eternal Dominion, staring at a report that made his 4 eyes blink in rapid, confused succession. His secondary mandibles twitched, the biological tell of an emotion his species rarely experienced. Unease. "Explain this again," he said, very quietly, to the trembling survey captain before him. The captain, a young Virati named Priel, held his datapad with both sets of arms as though he might drop it. "The humans, High Marshal. They landed on Galactic 9 approximately 18 months ago by their reckoning. A commander by the name of Darien Voss led the expedition. A small team, 32 individuals. Standard human exploration manifest. And?" Priel swallowed. "They are still there, sir. And the planet is no longer quiet." Commander Darien Voss had read the Dominion's abandonment report, of course. She had read it the same way she read most things that told her somewhere was too dangerous, too dead, or too hopeless to bother with one eyebrow raised and a slow smile building at the corner of her mouth. The Persephone had touched down on Galactic 9's primary continent, a flat expanse of pale sand hemmed by enormous crashing waves the color of bruised plums. The air had tasted of salt and something electric, like the moment before lightning. The twin suns hung low and amber on the horizon. "Beautiful," Darien had said, stepping off the ramp first, as commanders do. The sand compressed under her boots with a satisfying crunch. "Absolutely beautiful." Her first officer, Jo, had been less impressed. Jo was a practical woman, tall, dark-haired, with the permanently skeptical expression of someone who had been on too many of Darien's expeditions. "The Dominion said this place is dead," Jo said, scanning with a portable array. "Bio-readings are almost flat." "Almost," Darien replied. "Commander." "Almost, Jo." "Not 0. Almost." Jo had looked at her. Darien had smiled back, already walking toward the treeline of enormous crystalline formations that jutted from the beach like cathedral spires. That had been 18 months ago. What the Dominion's instruments had missed, what their surveys had failed to account for, was that Galactic 9 was not dead. It was dormant. There is a difference, and it is the kind of difference that only a species with humanity's peculiar combination of stubbornness and curiosity tends to notice. The Dominion survey teams had arrived, scanned, found silence, and left within 72 hours. Efficient. Logical. Reasonable, by every measure. But me, the youngest xenobiologist on Darien's crew, a gangly 24-year-old from New Perth who had never been on a deep survey before, me had noticed something on day 3. A pattern in the sand near the waterline. Not the random scatter of wave erosion. Something rhythmic. Something periodic. Commander Voss, me had called, kneeling in the violet surf with his instruments held at arm's length. "You need to see this." Darien crouched beside him. The pattern was subtle, rings expanding from a central point every 47 seconds, like something breathing beneath the surface. Slow, vast breathing. "The whole planet," me had said, his voice barely audible above the crashing waves. "I think the whole planet is alive. And I think it's been asleep." New York, the team's acoustic specialist, a quiet woman who communicated primarily through her work, had set up a hydrophone array along the coast that same evening. What she heard, she played back for the crew at dinner, low-frequency pulses, deep and resonant, like a heartbeat the size of a continent. Traveling through the water. Traveling through the sand. Darian had listened to it for a long time, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug, her eyes distant. "We wake it up," she had finally said. "Commander," Joe had started. Carefully, Darian had added. "We wake it up carefully." D, short for Derek, though no one called him that, was their communications engineer. He was also, by universal acknowledgement, the most unconventional member of the crew. While the scientists catalogued and the soldiers established perimeter, De had begun something that no survey protocol called for. He had started talking to the planet. Not in any language. Not in code. He had simply begun broadcasting the team's own sounds, their laughter, their arguments, the clatter of equipment, the music someone always seemed to be playing in the mess tent. He had broadcast it on the same low frequency as the pulses New York had recorded, played it back into the sand through buried transducers. "You're sending them our playlist?" Hi, the medic, practical and permanently exasperated, had asked, hands on hips, staring at the transducer grid. "I'm sending them something alive," De said simply. "They've been asleep for what I estimate is about 40,000 years. The last thing they heard was probably nothing. I figured we'd give them something worth waking up for." Hai had shaken her head. But she hadn't told him to stop. Why, the mission's geologist, who had been growing increasingly agitated with joy for about 3 weeks, had brought the final piece. He had spent his nights drilling microcores through the sand, and what he found in the substrate was extraordinary, a vast biological network, mycelial in structure but mineral in composition, threaded through the entire planet's crust like the roots of a god. Ancient. Patient. Connected. When Darian had looked at was maps, the scale of what they were standing on had finally, fully landed. The planet was one organism. One enormous, ancient, sleeping organism. And they had been living in its palm for 18 months, poking at it with instruments and laughter and music, and it had begun, very slowly, very carefully, to wake up. The report that arrived on High Marshal Zyrex's desk described biological mass readings increasing by an order of magnitude every 40 days. Seismic activity that was not tectonic but deliberate, rhythmic surges moving toward the human settlement. The ocean itself had changed color in a radius of approximately 200 kilometers around the Persephone's landing site, shifting from violet to a deep, luminous gold. And the humans, the 32 humans, were still there. Not evacuating. Not broadcasting distress signals. They were responding to it. Zyrex's intelligence officer, trying to keep his voice level, read from the intercepted communications, "Commander Voss, this is Colonial Command. We are reading extraordinary biological escalation on your position. Please advise evacuation status." And the reply, in Commander Darian Voss's unhurried voice, "No evacuation needed. We're making contact. Give us time. They are attempting to communicate with a planetary organism," Zyrex said slowly. "Yes, High Marshal. That we declared abandoned." "Yes, High Marshal." Zyrex was quiet for a very long time. Outside the viewport of his war chamber, the stars drifted past in their slow, indifferent procession. "They found something alive," he said at last, "that we declared dead. They stayed when we would have left. They spoke when we would have stayed silent." He set the report down. "And it is answering them." His intelligence officer said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Zyrex pressed his secondary mandibles together in an expression that, in his species, indicated deep and reluctant respect. "Pull every Dominion vessel from the Kelleraf system," he ordered quietly. "Whatever is happening on that planet, whatever those humans are doing, we will not interfere. Not yet." He picked up the report one more time and looked at the final intercepted transmission from Commander Voss, sent just 6 days ago. First real two-way exchange today. It knows we're here. It knows we're small. I think it finds that interesting. More updates to follow. Voss. High Marshal Zyrex set the paper down. For 30 years he had surveyed 1,000 worlds and called them by what they appeared to be on the surface. He was beginning to understand that the humans looked deeper. On Calarath 9, the twin suns were rising over a golden sea. Commander Darian Voss stood at the waterline, boots off, feet in the warm surf, and watched the light move beneath the waves in slow, deliberate patterns. Beside her stood Joe, and me, and New York, and and High, and with her crew, her people, all of them watching the same thing in companionable silence. The planet breathed. They breathed with it. You know, Joe said finally, the Dominion called this place dead. I know, Darian said. We've been here 18 months talking to a living world. Yep. Joe was quiet for a moment. You knew. When you read the report. You knew they were wrong. Darian looked at her sideways. I knew they hadn't stayed long enough. She looked back at the golden waves. That's our thing, Joe. We stay. The light beneath the waves pulsed, once, twice, in the same rhythm they had been broadcasting for months. The crew, almost as one, exhaled. Darian Voss smiled. Somewhere in the dark between stars, a Dominion fleet held its position and waited. The Beachworld had never been abandoned. It had only been waiting for someone patient enough, stubborn enough, human enough, to wait back.